And now back to the Kovac's Perspective.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Steve Kovac. Our next guest is, I want to personally thank for being here. I have lots of guests and lots of great topics. This is a topic that we hear about on the news, and everybody that hears it, I'll guarantee it, other than people that are actually doing similar. When they hear this, they all shake their heads and they go, I can't believe it. And I'm talking about sexual abuse by people of the cloth. And our guest is a pastor, a husband, and his wife was sexually molested by her father, and her father was a pastor. So our author wrote a great book called Tear Down This Wall, and he talks about religion and this sexual abuse and these kind of things going on in religion, and he talks about bringing it out in the open, talking about it, and let's stop it. Let's not hide from it. I think. Let's find out what the book's about. Dale Ingram, how are you, sir?
Doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, and I'm lucky to have you because of the topic. Dale, I mean, we hear of this way too often, and your family has experienced it, your wife, and
Yes.
and you are a pastor. So tell me, sir, Dale, tell me, first of all, why does this seem to happen so much with people of the cloth, or does it just seem like it's so much?
It's really pervasive. I don't know if it's more pervasive within the church or outside the church. One thing that offenders, I think, find in the faith community is there's lots of children. Most of our churches, most of our organizations, if they're doing children's work, we always need volunteers. We need people to come in and help out. So it's a perfect opportunity for an offender to come in and have easy access to kids. And all too often, when they do offend, for whatever reason in the faith community, people seem very reluctant to want to report it to the authorities. So it's the ideal spot for the offender.
Okay, and that makes sense, but I'm going to take a little bit further here. Your wife, her father, a
Yes.
pastor, molested her, and we'll get a little bit into that a little bit later. And my question, what I'm leading up to, Dale, is that is there a certain type of people that gravitate toward pastorhood? It's probably not a word. Or to religion because of that easy access, or because of something else?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think that because the easy access is there, people become scout leaders, or people become youth pastors, or even senior pastors. It gives them, one of the reasons we call offenders sexual predators, they're good at finding prey. And I think what you just mentioned is true. People will go to a particular place or position because that gives them easy access.
Dale, what gets me there though is, and I usually don't tell anybody my beliefs, whether religious or God or whatever, but I do believe in God. And what gets me, Dale, though, is if a pastor really believes in what he or she is saying, how can you grab a 4-year-old or a 9-year-old and sexually molest them? Because, I mean, you've got to know you've probably ruined them their entire life. So, you know what I'm saying? You follow where I'm going with this, Dale?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
And to go back to your question, you said if they really believe what they're saying. And I think in most cases we're talking about people who don't believe in what they're saying. They're a shell. They have an outward facade, but in their heart, it's empty.
Well, you just answered something that has been a puzzlement for me for years. Whenever I, and I've written on topic of abuse, sexual abuse, and just physical abuse on kids, and whenever I broach the topic, I always ask myself, how do you do that? I mean, you got to believe. I'm guessing you believe in Jesus or whoever, whatever you believe in your mantra of from the religion that you happen to be in. But you're saying that you feel that the ones doing this don't really believe. They're a shell.
Yeah, I think you have to conclude that when you really take a close look at this and you look at what they're doing. One of the studies that we quote in our material says that this was a 1988 study, that the average offender in their study had as many as 117 victims. That was the average. So the offenders in that particular study averaged out 117 victims. I mean, it's just staggering to think when an offender's doing that, you have to think that they're just a shell. It's just an outward facade.
Well, let me tell you, Dale, what you just said to me is extremely enlightening to me. I've never heard anybody say that, and I'm curious more about your book because it makes me think that you're really into this and you've delved deeply, and that's just it really zapped me there. Tell me a little bit more about your book. What's your book about?
The book is called "Tear Down This Wall: Sexual Abuse Within the Church." And I do a little play off of Ronald Reagan's words when he's talking about the Berlin Wall coming down. There's a wall of silence and secrecy that seems to surround this issue, especially within the faith community. And there is such a need to tear that wall down and just drag this issue out in the open. Let's talk about it. Let's have a dialogue about it. Let's help people be aware of the issue. We can't solve it or break the cycle until we begin to understand it. And the first step is really tearing down the wall of silence that surrounds it.
And how can anyone argue with that? My first guest talked similarly to what you're mentioning. He's got a book that many feel is sacrilegious to Obamacare. So instead of throwing it out there and say, hey, read it, let you read it, and possibly, and if I am so against this, read it, and you too will get enlightened, and see how I look at it. Instead, many say, oh, it's not here, don't touch it, don't even go there. And it's kind of what I get out of this too, Dale, that it happens in the church. Let's not even talk about it. Let's deny it. Let's hide. Let's put our heads in the sand, and it just can't work. And you're on a mission, right, to get it out there and talk about it, discuss it.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things my wife and I noticed, we started our ministry about 7 years ago. And when we were talking about our history, both of us grew up in church, and we both graduated from Bible college. I graduated from a Christian school, and neither one of us ever once remember hearing anyone talk about the issue of childhood sexual abuse. I mean, not even talk about it, much less really teach in a substantive way on it. So it's something we have to start doing, even though it's an uncomfortable subject.
I agree with you. Now, you mentioned your wife. How's your wife? How'd your wife get through all this? Where's her mindset at?
That's a good question. My wife's name is Faith, and she's doing really good. She's done a lot better since we started our ministry, because since we started our ministry, she started sharing her story. And I think with victims of sexual abuse, we tend to hold everything inside. And when we're able to share our story or what we've been through or what happened to us, it at least begins the healing process, or it can begin the healing process. And so my wife has done really well in the last 7 years. A lot of people, though, have a lot of survivors in our online community that were so damaged by religious offenders that they've left the faith. They've walked away from the church, maybe not ended their faith in God, so to speak, but they've walked away from everything that they've known.
Well, Dale, how do you not walk away? I've never been abused, but I mean, I could just imagine if I'm being abused for 4 years. I'm from I went to Catholic church and Catholic school. And I've, again, never been abused, but I just could imagine if I'm being abused 3 years of my life by this man that says church and all that good stuff and tells me to love God, love Jesus, et cetera, and then in the back room he's doing this and that to me and little Timmy also. How could I can't imagine me believing in God unless I have some huge conversion, which I can believe can happen. But it's terrible.
Yeah. It's a real struggle, and I'm sure that there's people listening to your program that's where they're at. They've walked away, maybe not from God entirely, but they've walked away from the church or whatever group, where the abuse came from. It's a difficult struggle. The church is hurting itself over and over by allowing offenders to stay in its midst.
How prevalent do you believe it is in churches?
Well, the statistics show there was a 2000 study done by the National Center for Victims of Crimes, and they found that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys will experience some form of sexual abuse by the time they're 18. So you're 1 in 3, 1 in 6.
In the church?
That's a general statistic, but everything that we're seeing, it's the same in the church as it is outside the church. There's very little difference.
Wow. Dale,
Yeah.
Is there anything that someone can do if they're going to a Pentecostal, Catholic church functions, school? Are there signs to watch out what the pastor may be saying or doing?
Yeah, we have signs of an offender are really important to watch for. Anytime you have an adult that's trying to isolate your child, and it may seem like it's in a healthy way, they just want to spend extra time with them, counsel them, mentor them. A lot of times parents aren't clued into the fact they've got to be careful. The vast majority of offenders are known to the child. Sometimes we talk about stranger danger and we warn our kids about strangers, but all of the other figures in our child's life, we tell them, obey authority, obey your Sunday school teacher, do what your youth group leader says. And we don't realize we're setting up our kids for the offenders. And it's the perfect place for offenders to go with these kids. We're telling them to trust, to obey authority, and we're creating some of our own problems here.
You mentioned a word I really have never heard anybody say. I've heard people discuss the general area, but you used the word isolation. Whenever someone wants to isolate your child, that's really interesting. That's a key, isn't it?
It is. When you have an adult, and this is a tough one because we want to encourage kids, we do want to mentor kids, but this abuse is at an epidemic proportion, and we have to be smart about how we deal with kids. It's not good for an adult to be alone with a child, and when you've got a youth pastor or a pastor that's always offering to take so-and-so home after youth group, and it's just the two of them, a lot of abuse happens when you've got that isolation one-on-one.
That's something I think people should. And you have an area, a chapter or chapters in your book about signs of an offender?
Yes, and address the issue of some of the signs. There's signs of abuse, but another thing people have to be careful of, and Faith and I have talked to a lot of survivors where these kids are abused in crowded rooms. We're seeing a lot of them at family get-togethers. They're an uncle or a cousin, and molesting kids sitting on their lap. I mean, when it comes to understanding the issue of abuse, we have to rethink everything that we think we know about abuse. It doesn't just happen in isolation, although that's certainly a sign to watch for. But we've got to be alert when we have family get-togethers. One offender can ruin a whole church. It can ruin a whole family. It can ruin a community. And we just have to be really alert for it.
Well, I've done a lot of reading and writing on this topic, and you, my friend, if I could call you that, are hitting on some great points. That it doesn't have to happen in a dark bedroom or big closet. It can happen out in a crowded room. I'll bet you nobody ever heard that before other than people that have been victims. You're talking about groping and rubbing and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we had one victim shared with us not too long ago, that every time they'd have a family get together, one of her uncles would always sit next to her at the table. When the blessing was being said, he was molesting her. And it was every time they would get together. I mean, it's sick stuff. It's happening. And because it's so painful to think about, parents have a tendency to want to bury their head in the sand. People in the churches want to bury their heads. We don't want to think about it, but it's happening.
We're talking to Dale Ingram, the author of Tear Down This Wall. And Dale, I'm looking at you on camera, and I'm listening to you. And I like you, Dale. I'll tell you why. You look like you're just a man on a mission, but not an obsession. Which whenever I see somebody on a mission, not an obsession, I listen more close. And I think you're nodding your head. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And you also look like you probably don't take no crap. I mean, I think you're probably a great guy, but I wouldn't want to mess with you. I mean, but in the same breath, I can see a goodness in you. Dale, and I'm going to call you Pastor Ingram now. Pastor, why do so many, you mentioned that, I think it was a girl, that every time they said the grace or whatever at the table, why do girls and guys feel guilty when they're molested by an adult? Why does the victim feel guilty?
You know, that's a big thing too, because almost without exception, the victim feels the shame and the guilt that the offender should. It is not their fault. In almost every case of abuse, the person has some kind of a position of authority. They might be bigger, stronger, older, more powerful, or they're the leader. And kids, when they're faced with abuse, don't know what to do, and they're scared to death. They don't know who to tell, and for whatever reason, it seems to be instinctive that they feel guilty. They feel like it's their fault, and that's almost without exception. And they take that burden, and that's one of the reasons why they're silent. It's embarrassing, but they feel the guilt. They feel the weight.
That's interesting. Yeah, I found that hard to understand, and I've interviewed men and women who have been abused, and the ones that I've interviewed, Dale, where I interviewed a woman that was molested by her neighbor, and the neighbor actually, a friend of the family, loved friend of the family, just as you had mentioned.
Yep.
I mean, they all loved him and never suspected him, and he'd actually videotaped her.
Yes.
And then he sold the videos to porn shops, at the time, and then. Her little girlfriend would come over and play, and he got her in there too. And she is so, and I don't know what the word is, Dale. She said you could use my name in your book, or whatever I write about this, an article. She says, this is me, this is what happened to me. So It's really refreshing to hear that she's so upfront and she knows that she was a victim. And that's what really everybody is. You're a victim. I mean, you're just so much less. What do you hope to accomplish? Well, you got a bigger goal here, Dale, with your ministry on your goal to stop this. What is it?
I guess the larger goal would be to see the cycle of abuse broken, especially within the faith community. I mean, you think of the faith community and you think that we want to impact the world. We want to make a difference. Well, when we have this kind of garbage going on and we're not dealing with it, and it's going on in our midst, I want to see that cycle broken. And the first step in breaking that cycle is awareness. And at some point here, we have to hold the offender accountable. And almost no one wants to talk about this, but offenders need to be reported. This can't be dealt with in-house, within the church, or within the organization. We have an obligation, a moral obligation, a legal obligation to report abuse to the authorities and actually deal with it, not just let it go.
Is that the big fear for churches, that if we report it to the authorities, or to even, let's say, put out a newsletter that we fired Father John because of molesting? I can't even imagine a church saying that. But isn't it because they're afraid that people will leave God and leave their church?
Yeah, I mean, I think fear is the key word. they're afraid of a lot of things. They're afraid that they're going to, I think, lose money. They're going to lose donors. They're afraid of lawsuits. They're afraid of hurting the name of Christ or the name of their faith. There's all kinds of fear that's driving this silence and the secrecy. When it does surface, we sweep it under the rug. We move people around. But it would be so refreshing to just see a church and an organization be honest and deal with things openly and honestly. I think that would reassure its members. It would reassure its people that, hey, these folks are taking it seriously.
Well, especially now it would reassure, because, everybody knows what's happened in the Catholic Church. I mean, I'm thinking, I wonder if it's more prevalent there, and if we have time, I'll pick your brain a little bit about that. But everybody knows what's been happening. So now if people are upfront about it, if the leader of a church gets out there and makes it known that we are this and that, we're all for transparency, and if anybody ever abuses the system, abuses any of our parishioners, we will immediately notify people, we'll be on top of it. I'm almost thinking, if I would like that. I'd feel more comfortable sitting in that pew.
Exactly. Everyone says, even in politics, it's the cover-up that does the most harm. And it's so true when it comes down to abuse. Look at Penn State and what happened with them.
Well, and it is the cover-up. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I forgot that old saying. They do say that in politics, and it is. It's not the. I mean, it can't get worse. It really, the worst that anybody can do to another human being, other than sexually molest them, is murder them. And I've actually had people that have been victims before they've healed say that, no, I wish I would have been killed instead, because it's a nightmare. But I disagree with them. There's always hope. But that's a little bit of a different topic, and maybe your book covers that. But you're right, it's the cover-up. I mean, when you do the bad thing, or you're the boss and you find somebody doing a bad thing, it's terrible, it hurts for a while, but then you can work on fixing it and changing it. So that, you feel, getting it out in the open it can start a cycle of breaking that cycle?
Yes, exactly. And if you look at this thing from the victim's perspective, first of all, if the victim sees that the pastor and the church is going to rally behind them and they're going to be open about it, and allow the victim when they're ready. Now, a lot of victims are not ready to share their story of what they've been through. They say that the average woman is not ready to tell about her abuse until she's in her 40s. Now, I don't even know of statistics for men. So they may not be ready for a while, but it's so important for churches and organizations to allow victims to be able to share their story when they're ready, and so be open about it. But also, if there's any hope that an offender can change, and I'll tell you, it's really tough. Children are not safe around offenders, but if there's any hope, it's by confronting them, not just moving them around or pretending they don't exist. They need to be confronted, incarcerated, deal with it. It's when we don't deal with problems that they get bigger.
Well, and what you just said was another thing that most people don't say, Dale, because the general consensus on much of this, there's no cure for these people. But I would disagree with that from some studies that you don't hear a lot about. But I mean, it's got to be. You can't sweep it. You got to bring it out. You got to separate them, and then look at it in the light of what this person's doing, and go from there. If there's any hope for that person to not reoffend, that is the way. Now, we've only got about maybe 3 minutes left. And again, I want to mention your book, Tear Down This Wall, and you can go to speakingtruthinlove.org. Speakingtruthinlove.org to pick up the book. Can they get the book on Amazon, Dale?
You can.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. If somebody, 2 minutes left, somebody comes to you tomorrow, Pastor Ingram, and says, I was molested 15 years ago. I don't buy this God stuff, but yet something about your book or something about you intrigues me. Why in the world should I even believe in God, and can God help me to heal up out of this? What would you tell them, Pastor Ingram?
It's very difficult. It is hard. We have a lot of survivors in our online community, that are at that point that you're talking about right now, and they're really hurting. And probably the best thing we can do is to set a personal example of love and kindness, and show them the real Jesus or the real God. They've seen something really ugly and horrible from offenders, and religious offenders will pray with their victims. I mean, they're just disgusting. And it's almost like we have to re-show them or reintroduce them to the real God and to who Jesus really is.
Well, I'll tell you, looking at you, because of just your style and your personality, I think it shows that if somebody came to you, you might be able to, you may be that person that can say, look at me, I'm real. Not everybody's fake. Not everybody's not what they appear to be. There is a God. I'm here to guide you with that. You got to believe in me. It's a leap of faith for them too, isn't it, Dale?
It is. It is. Very difficult.
But it's possible. Ladies and gentlemen, yes. If you're one of those that have been abused, whether in a church or somewhere else, maybe pick up, Tear Down This Wall. It might have something there for you, and go from there. Dale, I enjoyed my interview with you, very much so. It was enlightening, and I know a lot about the topic. It was still enlightening, so I want to thank you for being my guest. I really do.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Happy holidays, Merry Christmas to you and everybody else, ladies and gentlemen. We will not have a show the last second Wednesday of this month because Santa personally wrote me a letter yesterday saying that he'd kick my butt if we did that close to Christmas. So we're not having that. But in January, we're going to start off, as a matter of fact, in January. Take a look at our website. Go online and look at the covacsperspective.com. Tonight we're going to have some information about a really kind of a groundbreaking show, reality 1-hour show about what's happening in our urban centers, what's really happening, not what you hear on TV, but from people that are in the urban centers, the crime, the murder, the despair, and what they feel can be done to stop that. Great show on tap. It's been great to have you in 2013. Be good to have you in 2014, so stick around. Happy holidays, everybody. Next time. Bye.
The Kovac's Perspective is brought to you by the WTOE Radio Network at throughoureyes.org. All WTOE shows are available as a podcast. Visit our podcast page to learn more. The Kovac's Perspective was written by Steve Kovac, directed by Tom Bendewalt Jr., technical director and audio engineer Len Azzarone, assistant audio engineer Lori Viscuso. For more information about the Kovac's Perspective, visit www.allsourcesecurity.com. All words, ideas, and comments expressed on the Kovac's Perspective are those of Steve Kovac and not necessarily those of the National Federation of the Blind, the NFB Northeast New Jersey Chapter, or the WTOE Radio Network. Until next time, I'm Keith Zaley.